Thank you for that. Okay. It's actually Starburst accelerator. It's meant to be a fun spin on the actual physics of a starburst creating new stars. So what I'd like to talk to you, thank you for having us join you again for our second year. Normally you're used to hearing my partner Francois Chopard do the presentation. He's much more charming, has better hair, and and can do it in French. Although I was born in France, I grew up in the States. So what I'd like to talk to you about is our story and where we got to today, and how our journey is basically brought together a virtual network of hundreds and thousands of startups, hundreds that have been kind of vetted by the industry, that are basically disrupting the model, but not disrupting the industry. And I really want to emphasize when we talk about Industry 4.0, that yes, the industry is ripe for disruption, but that thanks to the safety critical regime, your lengthy careers in a very safety critical infrastructure and regulated environment, it's not as easily to be disrupted. So let me begin by talking about some of the other industries that have been disrupted in other ways. By show of hands, how many of you use Uber on a regular basis? Interesting. Okay, I thought by now everyone would be. How many of you use Airbnb on a regular basis? Good, same amount of people. Okay. And so with that, I think what I want to talk about is how the automotive sector has gone through its disruptive change. You've seen significant evolution in the technology. You've seen significant evolution in technology being proposed around rail mobility, what's being proposed with Hyperloop today. Also as well with microprocessors and where we see that evolving. You've probably seen this 100 times when you hear the word innovation in aerospace. Tom Ender specifically references the design of the commercial aircraft has not significantly evolved all the way since the 1960s. We all know that we're seeing some changes today, but what does that mean? We've had some fantastic innovations. The word innovation and aerospace go hand in hand. For generations, we've been on the frontier of pushing what technology can achieve in the aerospace, space, and aviation industry. Unfortunately, we've seen some of our best innovations retired. So what does that mean for the future? So this is meant to kind of give you that idea. How has the passenger become more technically capable or more reflective of today's capabilities in technology and innovation than the pilot? We often muse on how every button in the cockpit represents an incident that's happened in the history of aviation. So when we look at the industry dynamics, some of you saw our presentation yesterday if you joined the startup Dragon's Den that we hosted. We know historically that North America and Europe have dominated and as the established aerospace clusters. We know the emerging landscapes have been in Latin America and Brazil, in Japan, China, Russia, as well as the heritage of Bombardier here in Canada and Montreal, in Quebec. So how have we started to think about what the emerging landscape is and where is competition coming from? Is there a threat coming from a lateral position in Silicon Valley? And what I'd like to talk to you about today is a little bit about what are understanding the factors behind that evolution and why so many people continue to obsess on the culture of Silicon Valley. So this is a report you're welcome to look up online. It's called the Startup Ecosystem Report. And what it does is it tries to capture some of those variables, those factors, the criteria that goes into defining what justifies that Silicon Valley mindset, that culture. What is it about the performance, access to talent, access to venture capital funding to really get behind your ideas, understanding your market potential, access to that market reach, and the exposure you can get. And once you aggregate all that, trying to understand why so many cities around the world try to mimic that sort of mindset of saying, we have Silicon Alley, we have Silicon Prairie, Silicon Roundabout, Silicon Beach, Silicon Forest in Portland. I've heard it all. And specifically, how many of us here in Canada know that Toronto has long been trying to kind of be that driving force in the tech and venture community. But in recent years, we've seen Montreal basically join the club and have a place on that map. And what I'd like to talk to you about is kind of how we at Starburst, when trying to understand what that sort of hypergrowth in the tech and venture community, in that culture of Silicon Valley, how it intersects with that previous map that we've just saw around established aerospace clusters and emerging markets. And when that intersection happens, understanding that basically gives us this kind of map around the world of why when we look at that intersection happening, we should not be trying to chase the Silicon Valley mindset. We should be thinking about how that Silicon Valley mindset will enter and disrupt the model of an industry that we are very familiar with here in Montreal, and why we decided to set up shop in Los Angeles. So originally the idea was started in Paris by Francois, and I was living in London at the time. I came from this tech culture, the fast money culture of California, and I wanted nothing to do with it, and I found comfort in as a congressional aide working as a parliamentary staffer, specifically on export control for military technology to overseas governments. My career then in aerospace and aviation brought me to the UK, where I met eventually Francois, and I was running the British Air Traffic Services corporate venturing activities, which was part privatized, working with Lockheed and many others and Raytheon to invest in the future of drone technology, performance-based navigation, satellite-based flight tracking. And when we met, we said, inspired by what you see in Silicon Valley, it was easier because of the hierarchical structure of the aerospace supply chain in France and in Europe to get more organized and to bring that community together. How do you allow yourselves as industry gatekeepers to help decide through a means of a Dragon's Den, a Shark Tank, to decide who and how are the businesses you should be partnering with? And how does that Industry 4.0 become more collaborative rather than disruptive? So when we decided to then set up shop in the US, we really had to ask ourselves, where is the concentration of engineering talent? Where are the producers? Why is SpaceX setting up shop in Hawthorne? Why is Hyperloop setting up shop in downtown LA? Where is the engineering talent coming from in Caltech? And it's no different in those understanding those metrics and those factors here in Canada, and why we are really excited to continue to grow our footprint here, working with our partners at Innovitech, which we can talk about later. So specifically, I just want you to kind of wrap your heads around our ranking of cities, why the geography and those macroeconomic factors are coming together here, not just in Toronto and Vancouver, but specifically how that intersection with aerospace will happen here in Montreal. So who are these tech enablers? This is a map of the sort of belt between Seattle and San Diego, but it really tries to highlight our generation's privateers, the tech tycoons as they've come to be known, as part of that first wave of the dot-com era that ended in the 90s with the largest acquisition of PayPal by eBay, which resulted in Peter Thiel and Elon Musk having so much cash to then throw around and decide what they want to do next. And the same happened for so many others when you look at what Google is trying to do. So how do we start to think about why Mark Zuckerberg and why Larry Page want to become more involved in aerospace? And what this map does, this grid is tried to help you identify is why the tech sector wants improved access to internet. How does a Facebook want to move from 3 billion users to 4 billion users? How will that improve their business? Understanding how the financial services market wants better access to Earth observation and remote sensing, using artificial intelligence to basically do change detection on how many cars are pulled into a seaport, or what are the status of oil tankers in China, and how do they hedge the markets in that way, using that sort of actionable information. Understanding the access to space and making that sort of launch capability much more affordable. Understanding the new modes of transportation with electric aircraft, as well as increased use for the consumers and the industry and the enterprise with unmanned systems and smarter data algorithms. So what this does is really just try and paint a picture of, and by the way, that SpaceX logo should have been lower, sorry about that, about how these tech tycoons need to understand the physics of aerospace, need to start to participate and lower the barriers to entry to do aerospace technology in order for their businesses to be lucrative. So this is in order for, Google's always been an AI company. It was made very clear before they even went IPO. And how will this increased access to aerospace technology help them achieve that increased user base and access to space? So hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of how just a small slice of non-aerospace players have started to enter the fray, and how basically traditional and established industry is no longer the only game in town. That there is a sort of a use case and some success metrics that we can look at with SpaceX now, with economic models behind Tesla, with Palantir, and understanding the big data models behind them, and how they have become Silicon Valley exports that have stratified and gone into other verticals and other industries. When we talk about aerospace today, it's basically reflective of where biotech was 10 years ago. I don't like to compare it with clean tech because clean tech didn't exist before that. So it's really, how do we start to compare and understand the amount of non-traditional players, the amount of venture capital investment, and what this does, and many of you have seen this probably these statistics before, but it highlights how 2015 saw more investments in aerospace by non-traditional players than ever combined. And sure, a large contribution of that was by Google into SpaceX and the OneWeb. And then last year we saw OneWeb get its relationship with, over the last few months, with SoftBank, and the change of ownership between Terabella, formerly Skybox, merged with Planet Labs and worked that relationship with Google. So now that we've seen the sort of initiators of SpaceX and Palantir and Tesla, and now you're watching the fast followers with Planet Labs and other sort of unmanned systems companies, we start to ask ourselves, what's next? What does aerospace have to think about next? We talk about the factory of the future. We talk about software eating the world. And what I'm trying to really highlight here is that money from investors outside of this industry has significantly increased in order for tech to be able to access this industry. So the barriers to entry have significantly lowered. I really want to make sure everybody understands that. A few weeks ago, they had the latest South by Southwest conference. This is a panel that Beth Comstock, who's vice chair of GE, had with Jason Tanz from Wired magazine and Steve Case, the founder of AOL. He just published his latest book called The Third Wave. And what this does is it highlights what I mentioned in the beginning, is this first wave of the dot-com era, which was basically helping people get online. The second wave of the Facebooks to really help people create access to start creating profiles and understand, to have that digital profile, have that online representation. And that's when you saw Silicon Valley kind of, and Toronto and many other innovation hubs really push ahead with social media, this whole kind of local, mobile, social framework, which Silicon Valley, the TV show, has made a lot of good fun of. But understanding the third wave is, how does that start to intersect with established industry? How is oil and gas? How is pharmaceuticals and health? And how will aerospace and manufacturing basically embrace this new culture of Silicon Valley, which is thinking no longer about social media, but thinking about artificial intelligence, which I know is a big deal here in Montreal, thinking about IoT, and thinking about robotics. And how will those skill sets basically start to work into all the different verticals and other industries that are out there? So who is Starburst, and why are we involved in doing this? Francois and I have basically recognized the need for established industry is so immense and so significant that it was really difficult for people to know who to talk to and how to build those relationships between them. We talk about this trend of product development, R&D. There's been this long history of how private corporations have worked with university research labs, how university research labs are struggling to license their technology to private corporations, mostly because you, the suppliers and the primes, have become so good at vertically integrating that R&D capability. Also mostly because a lot of that was subsidized through government grants. So we start to think about traditionally how we've tried to source talent recruit, find talent, and play the game of the innovator's dilemma. The innovator's dilemma was the idea that Clayton Christensen talks about, which is when the iPads were first invented, did Toshiba and Panasonic go ahead and immediately make tablets? No. They still made a lot of money selling PC laptops. And so how does aerospace start to think about how it controls where product development, R&D money goes and where talent comes from? And that's changed. There's been this evolution in how startups have gotten a lot more credibility over the last decade. And as labs struggled to spin off their research and corporates have gotten better at creating and accessing and knowing those technologies and investing in research facilities around the world, talent has been harder to find, and it's become much more scattergun and splintered around the world. There's been this trend, thanks to venture capitalists. You've seen the word accelerator being thrown around much more frequently. Accelerator is basically the idea of an incubator done in a Stanford MBA boot camp that lasts about 3 to 4 months, and then they take equity and then they spit them out into the real world and they show them this is how to pitch your idea. We at Starburst believe there are thousands of accelerators that are very good at doing that, whether it's Techstars, whether it's Y Combinator, whether it's Startup Bootcamp. And what we say is once you've been through that foundational framework, let us then use our intelligent matchmaking platform to introduce you to the right and accountable decision makers in your organizations. There are people in your company that have responsibility in understanding what is this trend of startups. Why are my kids using Snapchat? Why is this becoming a big thing? And how has this new form of generating ideas and productizing becoming a trend to do on your own? We often refer to them as wantrepreneurs. Every day I get an email from somebody else saying, I have this idea. We think we can do this, and we're working on this on stealth mode late at night. My partner and I travel frequently around the world. I was in Israel and Tokyo and London just in the last month. So just to give you an idea, we are introduced and exposed to this intersection of entrepreneurship and talent thinking they can do this on their own now. We've seen a precedent thanks to the culture of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And now we see as those walls are lowered, many, many more of yourselves are starting to feel inspired and say, I have opportunities to go and develop these ideas myself. And it's our responsibility to say, don't do this on your own. There are corporates and companies like yourselves that want to do this together. So in the beginning of this talk, I talked about disrupting the model, but not disrupting the industry. What we find is that to do this in a more collaborative fashion is much more important. So how does Starburst accelerate the sales cycle, the procurement process? It's not just about rapid prototyping, it's about rapid purchasing. And how do you let the investors get a better understanding of who industry wants to see succeed? So how do you then start to outsource your product development through more creative commercial arrangements on the outside with these nascent businesses that no longer need research grants, but instead are looking for smaller commercial contracts? So it's really that sweet spot of TRL 6, Tech Readiness Level 6, of saying we know this technology is possible. We know the big corporates know the technology is possible, but we are better at taking that into the market than they are, and it's tougher for them to find each other. So how can Starburst provide that virtual network to come together and play and let yourselves decide who deserves that opportunity to work with your company? We like everything. This industry is so broad that when I say the word aerospace to different people in different countries and different cities, they take away something completely different. We talk about the new space environment, emerging space, small satellites, new launch capabilities. We talk about big data algorithms. We talk about unmanned systems, the passenger experience, flight data and sensors. We talk about energy management and storage, smart airports, factory of the future, as well as understanding robotics and cyber. So we really are overwhelmed with the amount of entrepreneurs that either come from outside the industry and think they can sell something, whether it's virtual reality, augmented reality, to yourselves, and don't know how to knock on, don't know where and how to find you, or it's people that are developing, one of our startups is a 777-sized amphibious drone. They just finished their 30-foot prototype and were published in Fast Company last week. And they are meant to disrupt the way freight forwarding works between air and maritime cargo. So there are people from outside industry that want to come in and people from inside industry that want to address other markets. We formally represent over 300 startups. Now, these are companies that we invite. We believe when we put arrangements in place with each of our corporate partners, we understand what each is looking for. That means we've become the successor to the old sort of industries SBIR consortium to say, we now know what all of you like, so let us filter the noise for you, present them to you, and let you decide who you want to work with. And we collect all that data, as we did yesterday, and share that back with you to decide, why did NASA like them? Why did Lockheed hate them? Why would you want to decide to help them with financially or put on secondment a couple of technicians to help them emerge their product in the next 6 months in exchange for, I don't know, first right of refusal for a later fundraising round? So let's talk about a small slice of the companies that we see around the world now that have not just developed these capabilities around flying cars, like Terrafugia, like electric vertical takeoff, like Lilium in Munich, or supersonic aircraft that are being developed again by Ariane, Boom, or Spike. Boom just secured its latest fundraising round of about 33 million. That was announced last week. Okay, this is no longer a child's game of we think it's a nice idea, but we're the only game in town that can do it. This is as real as it gets, and there are companies and there are people that have left working for Jeff Bezos, that have left working for Blue Origin, that have left working for Scaled Composites, Northrop Grumman, to go and join these companies and be significantly incentivized to say, come and be a part of our small team and journey to help accomplish what we like in partnership with old industry. So really just want to kind of give you an idea that this is happening right now around the world. New launch companies, stratospheric or high altitude unmanned systems. We see not just Solar Impulse, but what Google and Facebook have been doing, but what other private enterprises are doing. So, as well as commercial space, the sort of commercialization of low Earth orbit. We've seen companies like Ursa Space use military technique in synthetic aperture radar to provide information on oil tanks in China to hedge fund managers in New York City. We've seen innovations being spun out of NASA that are looking to do fire detection around the world, and companies like Spire doing communications and Hera for remote sensing and imagery in small satellite constellations. So really, I hope this has been a good introduction or a reminder of the sort of changes that we've seen. How here in Canada, there is a lot of history, and I can begin to tell you how often I hear the phrase, things are different here, that's not how things are done, there's a lot more politics involved. I love hearing about how artificial intelligence is becoming embraced by the state and being supported through entrepreneurship and various programs. But it's really not about a sort of a battle between David and Goliath, but how can you work as part of the established gatekeepers with small industry and the next generation of talent that want to do this with your support and with your help. And with that, I think I'm done. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Van. And perhaps before you go off stage, I will ask you, do you have like an advice for people here in the room? Some of them are looking at your presentation and it's a bit overwhelming in a way, and so they don't know where to start, you know. We're just in survival mode and bread and butter mode, and we have so much to do every day. So we look at this and we come out of this room as, where do we start? So as co-founder of Starburst,
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to get it right now. What is your advice for people in the room?
So we understand, we are very respectful of the local industry dynamics, and for that reason, we've formalized a partnership with Innovitech which many of you should know about if you don't already. And we've, as part of this arrangement, we've brought Emmeline, show your hand, and Florian from Innovitech, who will be that sort of representation in helping coach you and your business to be available to talk to you, but to potentially, whether or not it's just sharing some of those best practices, some of those lessons learned, and be that guiding principle. Please feel free to send me an email, and I'll make sure you talk to one of them. It's van@starburst.aero. It's pretty simple, van@starburst.aero. And what we will do is basically introduce you to our business process, which is, it's very common to think about these Dragon's Den, Shark Tank type forums, but those don't achieve the impact of innovation that we really want unless you are able to collect the intelligence on who wants to talk to who and who has accountability of talking to who. So what we've done is we work with Innovitech to offer a sort of a platform that helps you implement, either to measure, do an audit of your innovation performance in your company, establish some metrics, help you think about what you can do organizationally, and more importantly, invite you to take part and help facilitate and bring to you startups from around the world that may be a better match to help you achieve your strategic roadmap. So all of us from industry, we come from industry, we understand the sort of how the CapEx plans work in traditional aerospace corporates, as well as the deeper supply chain. So we are here to let you know you're not alone, and we know it's a difficult journey, and that we are interested in raising awareness inside your corporates. I know that for those of you that are here, you're probably already believers, and the challenge is how do you start to share that internally in a culture that has not yet understood why a company like Uber is less than 6 years old, valued over $60 billion. How is a company like Amazon valued with a market cap of $280 billion? These are statistics and financials that are staggering and overwhelming that will give chills to anyone of our leadership in these traditional companies. And for them to know they're no longer the only game in town is our opportunity to come and share some of these details for you to take inside your company. So please get in touch with us, and we're happy to help share you with that information.
Good. Okay, well, thank you, Van, for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.